Welcome everyone. My name is Amy Reesner. This is the League of Women Voters Legislative Forum. The League is a trusted, nonpartisan political organization. Members perform hands-on work to safeguard democracy. We do not endorse candidates. We are directly involved in shaping the important issues to keep our community strong. All members of the community are invited to join the League of Women Voters. Persons not eligible to vote are welcome as associate members. I'd like to thank the legislators for their time today. We appreciate you being here and being available to us. We also would like to thank Deb Roberts and her team for helping with arrangements, and thanks to Mercy Medical Center, of course, for hosting us. There are cameras around the room, as I mentioned earlier. This is being taped. On behalf of MediaCom and I'm On by Pro Video, it will be rebroadcast on I'm On Channel 6 and MediaCom Channel 18. Also, we're being taped by Neighborhood Network News, and that will be available to view at lwvlynncounty.org and neighborhoodnetworknews.com. There is information in the back of the room for you to peruse. That is information about the legislators, their districts, the legislative directory, etc. Help yourself. So now on to the process. The legislators will each share for 1.5 minutes what their goals are for this session, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. The way it works is that there are pens and paper around the room, and you will write your question out legibly, please, and raise your hand. Someone will come collect the questions and bring them to me. I very likely will not be able to ask all of the questions, but when there are multiple questions on a topic, I try to combine those and pose those questions to the legislators. And with that, I just remind you that we will have a courteous forum. So that means that we follow the process I just outlined, and please try to hold comments and clapping until the very end. And of course, the legislators typically stick around and give you an opportunity to meet with them after the videotaping is over. Thank you all for being here and being interested in this, and let's get underway. We'll start at this end with the 1.5 minute opening remarks. And Senator Hogue.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I hope you can hear me okay. I will try to project as much as I can so that you can hear. I'm Rob Hogue. I'm a state senator for Senate District 33, and we start with in a very difficult situation this year because of all of the governor's vetoes from what we did last legislative session. It makes it very difficult to know how this session is going to go. As you may recall from last year, we negotiated long and hard. We cut deals on education funding, mental health funding, Medicaid, oversight, and there were about 10 vetoes at the end of the session, not just K through 12 education and not just the mental health institutes. That really put us in a very difficult situation this year because just speaking for myself, but I think it's generally true for Senate Democrats, our trust level with the governor is basically gone. So anything we need to accomplish, we need to get him to agree to first. Obviously, the first issue out of the chute after he vetoed $55.7 million for K through 12 schools is going to be education funding, and that's really going to determine whether we can have a successful legislative session or not. He has a proposal for 2.45%. That's not adequate. House Republicans are going to make it even less adequate, apparently with a 2% proposal. So we're going to have to work through this, and if we can get a deal for adequate education funding, I think we may be able to have a good legislative session, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
I'm Wally Horn, state senator, basically for the west side of Cedar Rapids and Fairfax, and it's the southwest corner of the county. And anyhow, people, ask what's your goal? Well, first of all, about 3 or 4 weeks ago said this was going to be the shortest session we've had. And then I get there the day we show up and said this is going to be a long one. So when you say set your goals, so I'd set it for a short one or a long one, Well, anyhow, my priorities, top one has always been education. and I'll be trying to get there. And probably some of you might chuckle at this, but I'll also be trying on the casino, see what we can get done. It doesn't look that good. It looks like we need a different governor before we can get there, but who knows? Something might break loose. I have a bill in committee, and it could pop out any time if the chair would let it. So off we go on that. I think that we should concentrate on staying within our limits of spending, but I also think we got to think about one-time spending if we need it for issues that we did last year. And that would be, for example, if we can't give enough for K through 12 in the formula, we got to go out to one-time spending again. So I recommend that in the Senate that we go for some one-time spending if that's what it takes to get K through 12 funded the way it should be. Thank you.
Senator Liz Mathis from District 34, which includes Hiawatha, Robbins, Marion, Ely, Bertram, a slice of Cedar Rapids, southern Lynn County. I'll keep on the theme of savings. Our savings accounts are full at record levels. We have a healthy amount of money in reserves. We have our cash reserve fund is $539 million. Our economic emergency fund is $179 million, which is a total of $718 million. In addition, we have an FY16 ending balance, a surplus of $263 million. But that's not to say there is unlimited new money. There isn't. We're going to have to make some tough choices. Two of the biggest and outstanding commitments are K-12 basic school funding and to Medicaid. So I'm going to talk about K-12. In my opinion, we've got to get this done and done quickly, and I think all of the people up here are committed to working on that first. That's a priority for everybody, no matter what their number is. Secondly, an oversight, a Medicaid oversight bill goes through my committee. We're working on that right now to take a look at the transition to Medicaid, to managed care, and we're also looking at how can we really monitor this from a citizenry level, legislative level. I'm also working on locally for Prospect Meadows, Child Care, Kids First Law Center, an Alzheimer's bill, a Stand Up Accelerator grant, a tax credit for biochemical and bioprocessing. I'm helping Bertram with their bridge problems. I'm keeping the promise to backfill on commercial property taxes. And I went to 117 meetings since August, talking with people about the legislation that they're concerned about or legislation that they want passed.
Thank you. Senator?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's always good to see the bright sun and a nice warm day, because it's going to be colder tomorrow. But with all that being said, it's a pleasure to serve northern Lynn County. I have 4 counties in my district. It's a very rural district, 30 small towns. In Lynn County, it starts at Palo, wraps around the outside of the metro area, picks up Mount Vernon and Lisbon, shoots north to Anamosa, shoots north to Manchester, all of Delaware County, back down to Palo again. So it's a very rural district with 17 school districts and 30 small towns. And again, as the other senators said, we want to get education funded quickly, early, equitably, within the boundaries of what the state of Iowa can afford. And so I hope we don't play politics. I think education funding should fall within the realms of what other industries do in the state of Iowa. So playing politics is just going to kill schools. We're going to delay if we play that game. So we know about where it's going to fall. Everybody in this room knows about where it's going to fall and where it needs to fall. So if Senate Democrats shoot high, or House Republicans shoot low, it's going to get political. I think the governor has found a relatively close number that everyone can work with. We need to look at that, find out where it will fall. But education first. We're spending 55% of our budget on education, folks. State of Iowa cares. 55 out of every $100 goes straight to education in the state. So that's where we're starting. Thank you.
I'm State Representative Liz Bennett. I serve House District 65 in Cedar Rapids. That would be the Mountain View neighborhoods, Oak Hill, Jackson, Wellington Heights, Newbo, and the Czech Village. So some great, exciting places in town. Like my colleagues here, I'm particularly concerned about setting school funding first. I think it's absolutely essential that we fund our schools properly so that we can give our kids the opportunities that we know start with a good public school education. So that's my first concern. I'm also concerned about water quality. We have to find a solution to that in the state of Iowa. And I'm also seeking ways with my colleagues, frankly, to do the least amount of harm to the most vulnerable Iowans who may be hurt by this Medicaid privatization plan. In addition to that, I've been becoming more educated on criminal justice reform in the state of Iowa, something that I think particularly affects my district and the opportunities offered for people in my district. And we also know from news reports that there have been some plans to defund Planned Parenthood in the state of Iowa. That is something that my colleagues and I, especially in the House, will be working to prevent, as we believe that would be very harmful to a lot of women and men in the state of Iowa.
I'm State Representative Ken Reiser, and I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and I'd like to thank all of you for being engaged citizens and coming out today. My big priorities for this year start with education. All of us, I think, are committed to getting education funding set within the first 30 days. We've absolutely got to have that number set before the school districts validate their budgets mid-April. The governor has proposed an increase this year of $146 million in spending for K-12, and I think that's a good start. So a House subcommittee just passed $136 million, which was a little below the governor's number, and I know the Senate Democrats, I think, are about, right now, $83 million above that number. So we've got some work to do, but I think we can get there. What I'm committed to is funding education at the highest responsible amount that we can afford. I'm the vice chair of appropriations, so I'm very much interested in the budget. I want to make sure we live within our means, just like all of you have to do. And I'm chairing a budget review subcommittee that's going to look to see if we can find some savings in our various departments. And then the last thing is, I've sponsored a synthetic drug bill on behalf of Sergeant Gerald Meeks, who was an Afghan war veteran with post-traumatic stress who became addicted to synthetic drugs and ended up tragically committing suicide. This is a bipartisan bill that addresses both synthetic drug law and racial disparities in cocaine sentencing. And I'm excited to say it's got bipartisan support, including from Representative Stade. So I'm hopeful we can get that through.
Good morning. I'm Kirsten Running-Marquardt, State Representative from the west side of Cedar Rapids and downtown area. I do want to thank you all for coming out today. It is cold, Senator Zumbach, and tomorrow is supposed to be even better. So I'm glad it'll be warm in here with filled with much conversation. So I thank the League also for supporting this event today. Again, public education is good morning. We have room up here for you.
You want to squeeze that at the end?
How are we alphabetically? Okay. Yeah. So we're all situated, and come to find we are all human legislators who once in a while show up just a tad bit late for forums. He doesn't know I was a little bit late too, Representative Paulson. But again, education is going to be key. Unfortunately, the bill that came over from the Senate was at 4% SSA, or what used to be allowable growth, and it was cut to 2% when it made it over to the House in its first committee. That was unfortunate, but we will see where we can work together to move it forward to make sure that quality public education remains number one in the state of Iowa. We're also working through the governor botched the Medicaid transition to privatization. We're trying to work through that. We're trying to see if there's some legislative ways to do it. We've also been working with folks in the federal government to speak with them about, I know Senator Mathis has led the charge on that as well, but moving forward, we can be fiscally responsible, live within our means. We just can't necessarily always take all of the corporate tax cuts that come off the top, take all that off, and then say what's left, there's not enough money for anybody else, for education or for Medicaid or for the things that we see as priorities for Iowans. I do appreciate the governor thinking outside the box a bit with his taking the growth from the sales tax for school infrastructure money to go to water quality, but we are not to pit water quality against school infrastructure money. I think that's irresponsible, and we should really look for ways that we can work together to find the funding that our water deserves, and also our school infrastructure that also ends up being a bit of a property relief, a tax relief for residential property tax owners with the infrastructure money from the sales tax. So thank you very much. I got the stop sign. Didn't I get a couple extra seconds? Because okay, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the crowd, especially on a cold morning like this. And I'm Representative Art Stade from Cedar Rapids, northern part of the city. My first and foremost goal will be to continue to make sure that K-12 education and our other education institutions are a priority for the legislature, like they are for the people of Iowa. We've heard that over and over again. As a member of the Education Committee and the Education Approach Committee, I want to make sure that we adequately fund our schools. The governor's 2.45% increase, including with that the $50 million for the teacher leadership program, was a good start. Unfortunately, on Thursday, the House Education Committee had a subcommittee hearing in the House, and they took the 4% allowable growth that was passed by the Senate and split it in half to 2%. So it's going to be a long session again, but I want to make sure that education, our students in our schools get the adequate money for funding our schools. I don't think anybody thinks that $168 is too much, and we still have a gap of about $1,600 and some dollars compared to the average pupil spending in the United States. So that should be the first priority. Second priority would be an oversight or an absolute halt to the fiasco that we call the MCO. Thank you very much.
They're tough.
Hi, Todd Taylor, State Representative, representing most of Northwest and part of Southwest Cedar Rapids. This first forum is at the end of the first week, and so there's not a lot of legislation that's working its way through the process just yet. I have the text of speeches that were given this week. We have something from new Speaker Upmeyer and replacing Craig, and Governor Branstad and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. First day was Speaker Upmeyer, and she said relative to education funding, she wants to have a conversation about education. Specifically, if we are to improve the opportunities provided by education in Iowa's public schools, the expectation should be that we broaden the conversation. So I'm hoping a little bit more and that we write checks. Governor Branstad wants education funding, but he wants to split some of the monies with water initiatives. Both important, but we shouldn't pit one against the other as we've heard. He says, and I quote, today I'm preparing an increase for pre-K funding over $145 million, and later he talks that to make this level of funding possible, we have to make tough decisions in other budget areas. Absolutely, that's our budget process that we're just starting. And finally, a slightly different take, but also important, is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he talks about highlighting restorative justice and racial inequalities, particularly in juries and jury pools, and he also delivers this point. We can no longer view human trafficking as a problem reserved to the major cities of America. It exists as a dark underworld in many communities across Iowa and is associated with some of Iowa's most iconic places. There is no justice when children are abused or exploited. Last sentence, a prompt, comprehensive, and coordinated effort is needed to identify victims of human trafficking. I've never heard that type of a message from the Chief Justice. Very important. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Craig Paulson, State Representative, live in Hiawatha, represent Hiawatha, Robbins, Bowman Woods area, and the northwest corner of Marion. Seventh term, it's my last term. I announced last summer that I wasn't running for re-election, and as I'm sure you all know, stepped down from being the speaker this year. So I serve on the Judiciary Committee, which is a committee I asked for specifically to work on some of the human trafficking questions, and I also serve on transportation.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, no surprise, the largest number of questions focused on education spending. And I'm trying to kind of coalesce this in my mind, all the different questions that are posed out there. You know, how do we get from between 2.45 to 4%? Is this just a money fight? Is it a principle fight? Is it both? And where are the areas for compromise? I open it up to all of you. Don't all jump in there. Todd?
Well, I'll just jump out and say, I think that, and this is partially said earlier, we need to deal with education funding first and foremost and build the rest of the budget around it. If we don't, education and public education, pre-K through 12 is going to suffer. And so from that point, then we decide what the number is, and we haven't even decided what the number is as far as what's available and where we want to focus it. But if we do that first, like we're supposed to according to the law, as you all know, the law doesn't have any teeth in it, so there's no penalties if we don't do that. Okay, but we send the wrong message to the educators, so we need to send the right message. And if we get it done in the first 30 days, counting from Tuesday when the governor gave us his budget, we should be on track to sending the right message. He talks about, the governor talks about wanting to send the message of stability and predictability for the people who make budgets in the school systems, and we should do that. We should deal with that early. Well, that's what I'll be working on.
Well, I mean, we've received some budget estimates, I think, right? We're at roughly $7.33 billion estimated budget starting July 1 of 2016, which is estimated 4% higher than last year. So, you know, if we've got a surplus and we've got more estimated budget availability, what would stop us from spending some of that money on education?
We shouldn't be stopped on that, actually. I would just say that the questions are, if our law, which is a good law, on the 99%, we don't generally lately have 99% budget numbers. We have 95%, 96, 97% budget numbers. So that has a bearing on how big that available number is. That's what I was referring to. And there's a generally agreed 153 new monies, but if the governor shaves some of that off to other priorities, that's less for education. That's what I was talking about.
Well, and I think Representative Reiser, do you have?
Yes, please. So we've got a 7.33 billion basically that's available this year. Somebody referred to the cash reserve fund. Well, realize the cash reserve fund, we don't tap into that. That is used in order to pay our bills so that school districts and others never have to take a loan in order to cover what they need. So that's really off the table. You'll also hear people talk about the emergency reserve fund. Well, that fund is there specifically if we have an economic downturn. And we're not in an economic recession right now. So really that's off the table as well. So what we've got is the ongoing revenue of 7.33 billion plus whatever is in the ending balance. And the ending balance 3 years ago was 900 million, and then we spent it down to 700 million. The end of this last fiscal year, it was 400 million, and at the end of the governor's proposed budget in FY17, it's going to be at 112 million. That is a concern because this year alone, they were off in their estimate of how much revenue we would have by 130 million, and the governor's asked for a supplemental increase for Medicaid that we hadn't planned on for 67 million. So we're getting into a danger zone where we don't really have a reserve to cover us. So we've got 153 million in new available revenue. That's over what we're spending this year. And we've got more than 195 million in program new expenses. That doesn't even consider spending for K-12, the community colleges, the Regents universities, and countless other things. So the budget is incredibly tight. So we've all got to do our job and work together to make sure we live within our means and we don't run that ending balance down any lower than it's already, because it's already in the danger zone.
We've got a couple more comments. I think Representative Stade is up, and we'll get down the line here.
Right, I wanted to bring some figures that I had checked with LSA and others. So first of all, we have an ending balance from last year of $263 million surplus that was not spent. So we could have spent that on education on the $55 million last year that the governor vetoed. That would not have been a problem at all in our budget. We always balance the budget, and we did not dip into our savings accounts or surpluses to balance the budget. We haven't done that since 2013, 14, 15, 16. As a matter of fact, we've been under the spending limits each of those years in 2013, that we only spent 87.6% of the funds available. In 2014, 88.2%. Last year, 2015, we spent 96.8% of the total funds that were available. Our savings accounts are full and at record levels. We have the healthy amount of money in the reserves. Our cash reserves is $535 million. Our economic emergency fund is $179.7 million. And that's a total of $718 million. That's more than 10% of the state budget. So we have used conservative, fiscally responsible budgeting practices. Both parties have. It's about our priorities and where we want to spend that money. And the priorities should be in education. Over the last 5 years, it's averaged to be about 1.8% increase in the allowable growth rate, when schools have needed 4%. I think it's time to change that.
Representative, we've got some other
Okay.
folks that want to comment as well. Dan, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. You know, along with this, but we can really get in the weeds here and confuse everybody. You know, you have different ways of looking at the budget, this, that, and the next number. And so I'll clarify a little more. You know, the governor is actually looking at tax increases with this. I've been getting phone calls up and down the line from my small businesses that they're not going to be able to deduct a lot of their business expenses because of not coupling Section 179 with the federal government. So all these guys that may have to buy a dozer or a truck or some larger piece of equipment within their factories aren't going to be able to deduct those this year. Going to have to be depreciated over more time. So that's about between $80 and $90 million tax increase that's part of the governor's budget too to make this happen. But to clarify a little more, if you look at the state of Iowa, 55,000 line items, people asking for your money. It's not our money, it's your money. 55,000 people or different areas are asking for your money. And 3 of those areas take 90% of it. Education, Health and Human Services, and the state employees. So all those other 54,997 arenas are fighting for the other 10%. So if we screw up at all in these 3 big arenas, there's nothing left. And they're all important areas. It wouldn't exist if they weren't important. So that's why when we start throwing out 3%, 4%, 2%, they're huge numbers. We really have to zero in on what's important. And that's why it becomes difficult. So just some numbers that may be more generalized to help you absorb what we're trying to do.
Thank you. We've got a couple more folks down here. I know Rob and then Liz.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I just want to underscore Iowa's education funding, we are roughly $1,600 per student below not the leading state in the country, but the national average. And in Iowa, our schools are absolutely critical. They're the foundation of our communities, they're the foundation of our economy, they're the foundation of our future. We need the workforce for the future. So this is a major issue. We're not, the numbers we're talking about, the danger is that we continue to slide farther behind the rest of the country in education funding, and that's a real problem for us. That is a real problem for us because of the importance of education. 2 other points. You're hearing a lot about tight budget, tight budget, tight budget. 2 things. 3 years ago, we passed a property tax cut. This year, the number in that budget is $280 million that wasn't in the budget 3 years ago. And part of the thinking was, I know Representative Reiser went through this downward trend in our ending cash balance. Well, the commercial property tax cut was supposed to trigger so much economic growth that we were then going to be able to invest in these other things we care about. I question whether that happened. Finally, another self-inflicted wound from Governor Branstad. He unilaterally changed a tax law that he'd asked the legislature to change 5 years in a row, costing the state treasury another $50 to $70 million a year, including money directly, because it's a sales tax, directly away from some of the schools. So, you know, we got to make the decision in the state, is education a priority? We may not make that decision in the 2016 legislative session because of the current political configuration. So we're going to make the best deal we can if we can, or else we'll go to June again and have the governor veto something in July, what happened last year. But we do need to make that decision as a state, how important are our schools, and I think they're critical for our future of our state.
Okay, thanks. last comment from Liz, and then we'll move on to a couple of other topics in the last half hour of the forum.
And you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, Medicaid costs are so high, that's what's robbing K through 12 education. Here are the facts. The average cost per Medicaid patient is the same as it has been since the early 2000s. Here are two things that have changed that. One is called FMAP, which is the federal match to us, is determined by per capita income. Iowa is healthy with their per capita income. So the feds say, we're going to give you, right now, 55% of your Medicaid dollar. You, Iowa, pay for the other 45% of that Medicaid dollar. I'm rounding. So imagine a state like Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, their FMAP match is in the 70s. Right? 70%. And the state only pays maybe 30% of that. We're paying a much higher, as state taxpayers, a much higher amount because we're a healthy state. And that's good, but it's a catch-22. The other thing that determines the amount of Medicaid spending is how many Medicaid recipients do we have. We added, by Medicaid expansion, a number of Medicaid recipients. And we chose that as a legislature to do that. And so that's what we have. The good, bad news, in the next year, our FMAP match will go up. I think it's 57, 58. Ken might be able to correct me on that. But our prediction is that we will be getting a larger match from the federal government for FMAP next year, which will give us a little bit of ease off of state taxpayers' contribution to that.
Let's go on to Medicaid because there are, again, this is my second largest total question. And many of the questioners from the audience want to know whether we think the state really will be ready for a March 1st implementation on Medicaid privatization.
Okay.
All right.
This has been consuming my fall. This is all that I've been doing. Two other senators and I went to the White House to talk to the Department of Intergovernmental Affairs about, and to CMS and to the HHS director's assistants about the readiness of the state of Iowa to do this. The federal government can only look at the plan and say, yes, we agree, we'll partner with you. They cannot reject the plan. They can't say, Iowa, we're not going to partner with you. It is Iowa's plan, and that was determined by the governor and the director of Health and Human Services, that managed care would be better for Medicaid recipients. That is in doubt. That is in debate. And we're hoping that managed care will move a Medicaid patient along the continuum of care. That's the goal of it. Now, whether that happens, we haven't seen that happen very much in other states. Other states have done managed care in different ways. We've had managed care in the state of Iowa since the 1990s, when Magellan came in and started working with our complex mental health cases. So we're not unfamiliar with managed care. When we were in DC, we talked about the conflict and the chaos around this transition. The provider network was having problems. It was a very short timeline in trying to move this Medicaid system into a managed care system. Moving 560,000 Iowans in 4 months into another system is very difficult. My main problem with that is the time frame was too short. It was ill-sighted. The time frame was too short. I work in systems personally at a child welfare agency, and it is very difficult to do even with one small program. So we're talking about a huge number of people, huge number of medical files, all kinds of things to try to change in 4 months. So we went down a metric. There is a readiness metric that CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are grading the state of Iowa on. Are you ready in this? Are there enough MCOs in the provider network? Is there a good auditing system? Do you have a phone system, a quality care system that's up to par? do you have this? That there's a huge number of things that you have to check off, and then you have to prove, IME, Iowa Medicaid Enterprise, will have to prove that they're ready to go. CMS visited the state in December and determined, no, not by a long shot. They're going to come back in March and do the same thing. The governor's office is taking that as a green light and saying, of course, we're going to move over to a managed care system on March 1st. That is not what CMS said. CMS said we will come back March 1st and see if you are ready. I have to say, we are building the provider networks more. We are strengthening. IME is trying to get this done, and they're using their time wisely. The call times, we've gotten a report from IME, the call times are getting better. Things are getting better. But we're seeing some people randomly kicked off elderly waiver. Some people are being kicked out of the system, and we're wondering right now why that's happening.
Well, let's have some other folks
Yes,
weigh in
go
on this
ahead.
topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I could go
I
on for
appreciate
an
the very
hour.
thorough response, but I think Kirsten had waved her hand, said she wanted to weigh in, and we'll come back down here to some other folks.
I just would like to add that when we're having these conversations, the sky is not falling here in the state of Iowa in our finances by any means. We are doing okay. Some of these other funds we have filled, but then we also have this Taxpayers First Fund. So it seems like sometimes when we do get ahead on things, there's a new fund or a new bucket created with some kind of catchy lingo on it that takes away from the choices and decisions that we as legislators can make moving forward with the budget. On the Medicaid issue, I have been in my neighbors' homes, my friends' homes. Seniors have called me on the phone. They're trying to figure out their forms or who they were supposed to pick, and it has been a very difficult transition, disrupting people's lives. And when we have big changes like this, usually the state of Iowa does things like look at other states and see what has worked there and what has not worked there. You don't move forward on waivers first if that's not what seems to have worked in the few other states that have moved to managed care. So the governor and the governor's office, they missed an opportunity here to learn from the mistakes of other states in this managed care privatization. I sincerely believe that Iowa Medicaid Enterprises, IME, if we would have been able to direct them as a legislature and as the governor's office to do the things that we wanted them to do, we would not necessarily have to have had come in a middleman of 3 to 4 private companies that are coming in that are private for-profit companies that are now in between us and the most vulnerable Iowans that we have across the state of Iowa. I think that that's not the way to go. We don't just throw them to the wolves and say, you know, I'm sure the shareholders in these companies are really going to care about my next door neighbor who's on a waiver, and that's sort of up for debate at this point now, where if they're going to be on the waiver or not. So moving forward, there are different things that we're going to try to do as a legislature to put in some stops or put in some oversight for this program and for these companies. And appreciate you all listening here today. I did have opportunity recently to travel to Cuba, and I think that also reiterated back that we are okay here in the state of Iowa. We are going to move forward. It's sort of the rub of how are we going to move forward and what do we want the state of Iowa to look like in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years.
Well, thank you very much. Dan, were you looking at me to make a comment or no? Okay. Ken?
Thanks. Costs for Medicaid were completely out of control, and we're threatening to overtake the rest of the budget. And the biggest part of the budget that would be affected is education. So, I mean, if you care a lot about education, managed care is something that you should probably be supportive of. The system wasn't working very well. It was a big government-managed system. It took 2 years for providers to get reimbursed for what they spent, which tells you that it's completely out of control.
No, that is not true. That is not true.
Well, let's let Ken finish his sentence.
That's not true.
Fraud rates were very, very high, and it was extremely expensive. So the governor decided to go down this path of managed care, which, I mean, if you think of it, probably the vast majority of people in this room get their health care through some sort of managed care private system. And so it didn't make sense that the people who have disabilities, people who are low income, would be stuck in this system that really wasn't working that well and was costing the state so much money. So the governor decided to go down this path that 39 other states have gone down. In fact, the state of Georgia has the same managed care providers as we have, and they were well ahead of us, and they're actually doing very, very well there. The House and the Senate both voted for it in the budget. In fact, the Senate thought it was such a good idea that they doubled the amount of savings in the first 6 months. They thought it was going to be $102 million in savings instead of the $51 million that the governor thought it would be. So change is hard. I think with the delay, the timeline is very, very doable, and it's aligned with what other states have done as far as a timeline. Please realize that the delay to March, though, comes with consequences. It's going to cost us an additional $17 million this year that we hadn't budgeted because of that delay. And every day we delay is about $250,000 to $300,000. So I am committed to make sure that we have proper oversight, that we make sure nobody falls through the cracks, but ultimately we want to try to make this thing work.
Thank you. Let's come down to Rob.
Yeah. So I've been listening to other people, and I have a different version than that. This whole thing is fundamentally flawed because whatever was just said, Iowa was regarded as having one of the best managed Medicaid systems in the country. The DHS had told us that as recently as right before Governor Branstad announced this transition plan. And what the fundamental flaw is, we're going to take all this money that has been going to Iowa administration and Iowa providers and Iowa patients, and we're now going to ship it out to out-of-state companies in Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Tampa, Virginia Beach. That money will be gone, all that administrative money. So it's really fundamentally flawed. I'd like to stop it. If we can't stop it, I'd like to slow it down. And if we can't slow it down any further, we need to make sure Iowans' rights are protected. Because what will happen is these out-of-state companies will try to maximize their profits by squeezing Iowa patients or squeezing Iowa providers. And it's wrong. Broader points. Senator Mathis made the point, FMAP, Congress hasn't been doing the job. Iowa has been penalized because we somehow have an efficient health system.
Yes.
And the second thing that's failing, just to bring it back, do you remember all the fanfare around the Healthiest State Initiative in 2011? We were going to become #1 in the state in health, the healthiest state in the country. Governor Branstad rolled this out. There's been no progress. We've actually slid back some occasionally, up here a little bit, down here a little bit. You know, we got to get serious about public health, and unfortunately we're not. But we got to address these larger problems. We have to address what Congress is doing to us. We have to address the health, making public health and making the state healthier, and we've got to stop this mismanaged Medicaid mess if at all possible.
All right, last comment before we move on, and that was Representative State.
Yes, I have the view that Rob has as well, Senator Hogue. I think that we need at this time, and I think it's clear that we need more oversight, stronger oversight of what's happening. Read in the Des Moines Register this morning about 2 of the companies who have a history of denying services. We had a third company that was out because they did not reveal the practices that they had in the past and the court rulings against them for the fraudulent practices. We had 3% administrative cost in our Medicaid system, and now we could have up to 3 times that. We're told that the administrative they're allowed to go up to 3 times that, or 9%, 10% administrative cost. In a $4.2 billion program of Iowa taxpayer money, that's $420 million. So you might expect that it would cost the state $400 million more in administrative fees alone. So how do they make up those differences, and how do they make profits? The choices that they have are cutting services or cutting the amount to our providers in the state. I don't see how that can be a cost savings to the state of Iowa. In addition to that, I have heard about the issues facing the Medicaid recipients providers every single day during the summer this year. I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of contacts about the issues and problems with this move. I think it's a debacle. It needs to be halted or need to have oversight so that we can make this thing work. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, Liz has begged and pleaded for
Please.
30 more seconds.
30
I'm
more
gonna give it
seconds.
to her.
Want to
30 seconds, go.
clear up two things. Reimbursement, Medicaid reimburses in 15 to 30 days with the clean claim, not 2 years. An MCO now has written into the contract, they'll reimburse 60 to 90 days with the clean claim. There are providers in this room that have taken up longer, larger lines of credit, I can see one back there, to alleviate this problem. The other comment that was made, that 39 states have done this, CMS told us that no state across the country has pushed all of their waiver programs across the table and said this is managed care. Not one. Iowa is the first state to do this. It's a mess.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Robust debate by everyone. We're kind of going to loop back to education because the questions that I took are numerous on the topic of whether we're going to pool some of the funding from education and put it into clean water. So the question is, what are your thoughts about that proposal? Representative Bennett.
So of course, at first glance, this is something that I am not a fan of. I think we should never be pitting two necessities, like a good public education and water quality, against one another. To me, that seems like a false choice, and I wonder if it might also be a political device. So that's my first point. Number two, I do try to keep an open mind. We do have to find ways to do things, so I have been researching. You know, some people have stated that it would not result in a cut to schools. Other people vehemently disagree with that. So I think it's something that myself personally, I am still evaluating. Of course, you know, former Governor Vilsack has stated his support for it. Many people are unhappy with that position on his part. And so it's something that I'm keeping an open mind to, but my gut feeling is that I don't like it.
Okay. Representative Reiser.
So the governor came up with a very creative proposal. And there's this thing called the SAVE Fund, and you all pay 1% sales tax that goes to school infrastructure. And that was supposed to go through 2029, and then it was supposed to sunset. So one of the things the governor has proposed is extending that to 2049 so that schools could continue to get money for infrastructure. But what he said is every year, if there's an increase above a baseline, the first 10 million of that increase will go additionally to school infrastructure, but whatever's left above that would go to water quality. So over a period of time, that ends up being about $20 billion for infrastructure and $5 billion, I think, is what I remember for. Don't quote me on those numbers. We don't have all the numbers in the governor's plan yet, so I probably shouldn't say that. So anyway, it's a creative way to both increase funding for school infrastructure and focus on critical water quality issues. Everyone doesn't love the plan, but it's definitely started a debate. And I'm very optimistic because I think water quality and school infrastructure are both things that are going to be funded for the long term. And I'm supportive of that, but I'm not necessarily certain that the governor's proposal is going to be what we settle on.
Thank you. Representative Taylor.
Well, one thing is we got to have like truth in budgeting type thing. And I don't like this proposal at all because here's the thing. If you raise the gas tax and lower tuition, people don't like that. They want lower tuition, but if you raise the gas tax and build a bridge and fix a road, people get that and they'll support it. Right? Now, so if you raise it, so the money we spend on education and the allowable growth we've been talking about, that funds teachers and keeps class size low. And the infrastructure dollars then later you have to do infrastructure for schools, which is what the SAVE dollars Representative Reiser was talking about. At some point, we need to invest back into those schools. So they have had some good investments, and I know like Cedar Rapids Jefferson, they have a new HVAC system. However, over here at Washington, they've got a HVAC system and they have some concerns over asbestos. So we still have infrastructure needs, and we got to be careful about taking money that's designed for one thing and being spent somewhere else. And people don't want that. And the most most calls I've ever gotten on anything in all my years in the legislature is when somebody said, we're going to raise cigarette tax and we're going to put it in economic development. We later raised cigarette tax, that was the right thing to do, but we put those monies into healthcare. People get it. That's what we need to do, truth in budgeting.
Okay, Senator, I think you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. You know, when the governor throws a proposal out there and there's a level of frustration amongst Republicans and there's a level of frustration amongst Democrats, I'm guessing he might be hitting pretty close. So it's really not a pit against education and water quality. It's not that at all. When you look at school budgeting, schools bond, they borrow dollars, but they need to have great security when they borrow those dollars. So the save was going to end in 2029. Well, we're getting close enough that time frame that schools that needed to borrow money to build something new, but the people that would buy those bonds are saying, you don't have a guarantee that you'll have that money out there. So the governor says, well, let's extend that, remove the sunset farther forward, so that guarantee is out there. So now schools have the security, so part of this program, schools have the security and the ability to borrow money on a longer term if they so choose or need to fix their facilities. One thing that we're forgetting is schools are going to get, if this happens, and it's discussion, but schools are going to get the first $10 million. And the next year they get the $10 million on top of $10 million. And the next year they get the $10 million on top of the $10 million on top of the $10 million, and so on. And so it is a huge increase for funding. And that if the economy is good enough, sales tax stay high, water quality, which is important to all of us too, gets that piece on top of the $10 million. Very creative way to look at this. So it's not taking money away from schools. It's allowing schools to have more and a longer term ability to have infrastructure, or the ability to improve their infrastructure. So we keep it in perspective. But the other thing the governor did, it's not loaded with details in his budget. Because we as a legislature always monkey with his budget anyway. So he said, here is a discussion point. What if we would consider this? It's going to mill through the Senate. It's going to mill through the House. And we'll have this discussion. Maybe something will come of it. Maybe it won't. But, 7 out of 10 people that voted for the governor. I'm rounding. So he's throwing an idea out there that we really need to consider and move around amongst the legislature and see if we can come up with an idea to finance both entities. It's a great discussion point.
Well, let's try to fit a couple more quick comments in, and perhaps we can get one last question in. Senator Hogue, did you have a quick comment on this water quality issue?
Two things. First of all, the Senate last year passed a clean 20-year extension of the statewide school infrastructure penny with bipartisan support. I think I floor managed the bill. I think, if I recall correctly, we had 36 votes, which means we had a bunch of Republicans along with Democrats. So that's a clean extension. We could do that if we wanted to. There's a little bit of urgency to it, but not too much, because any school district's going to back up the sales tax with the property tax. Here's the bigger problem I have. It doesn't solve the clean water problem. We've got over 700 impaired waterways in the state. We're the second leading contributor to Gulf hypoxia, and he's talking about taking this stream of money that's going to be there, gradually ramping up and maybe starting to become significant by 2030 or 2040. We got to act on water. There's a perfectly good vehicle that groups have been working on for years to increase resources, which is the Water and Land Legacy, the Natural Resources Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. That's one. And two, lurking behind this whole thing is the Clean Water Act, right? And if the legislature doesn't do anything this year, we're going to see what the Clean Water Act means in Iowa because of the Des Moines Water Works lawsuit. And you know what? I'm willing to roll the dice on the Clean Water Act. Right? That's not my preferred solution. I'd like to have us take responsibility and actually solve the problem now. But, we don't need to do some sort of harebrained scheme that might kick in 2030 in a big way in order to not solve the problem. That doesn't make sense to me.
Representative Paulson, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, I would just say this. First of all, we are not the federal government. Federal government can print money, they can bond, they can do whatever they want, right? Every dollar in the budget competes with every other dollar in the budget. So all this education versus water quality, that's exactly right. It's also water quality versus justice. It's water quality versus whatever we're paying for. You know, to include the property tax bill, I think Senator Hogue brought up, and that's correct. And for whatever reason, the General Assembly last year, and this was not, you know, I agreed to it, voted for the budget and all those things, and sat in negotiations, but, you know, a decision was made by the General Assembly that it's more important to backfill local governments in the property tax bill than it is to fund additional money into education. Every dollar competes against every other dollar. I will say this, I think that the governor's proposal, I appreciate the fact that he's stimulating a conversation on some long-term funding. Maybe it doesn't kick in quick enough, I don't know. You know, there's lots of little things, but at least he's stimulating a conversation about long-term funding for water quality, and I think that's something we can agree that is a meritorious conversation. I will tell you that I'm disinclined to be supportive of extending the sales tax an additional 20 years, but I still think we need to have the conversation on the water quality. But don't kid yourself. Every dollar, because we have a finite amount of money we can spend at the end, every dollar competes with every dollar.
Thank you. Let's take one more quick comment from Representative Stade, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Right, I think it was a clever thing for him to shift the issues about water quality to funding it this way from education funds and pitting them against one another when we really need improved monitoring of our water quality. We need to have more accountability measures on our water quality. We need to fund it. We know the voters voted overwhelmingly to support the Natural Resource and Recreation Program. We haven't funded that yet. We haven't funded REAP fully each year either. So we have a lot to do in the water quality issues, and that's a completely separate issue from education. And we aren't going to do both by simply approving the SAVE money. It's a separate, necessary priority as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's do a quick show of hands in the final time. What, out of everyone here, if you think it's a high likelihood that you will pass a increase in minimum wage this year, raise your hand.
High likelihood?
A high likelihood?
State, okay, Todd, all right, optimist. Out of all of you here, raise your hand if you think there's a high likelihood that you all will reach some sentencing reform in criminal justice this year.
Very hopeful.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you putting yourselves out there. Thank you very much for all of the questions from the audience. Thank you for your answers today, and of course, everyone's time on this cold January day. There are directories of elected officials in the back of the room for you, so please go back and get those. Thank you again to Mercy Medical Center for allowing us to host this League of Women Voters Forum here. A reminder that there will be one again next month. We're staying tuned for that. Again, my name is Amy Winston, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters,
My grandpa, it can be good. You're like, check your sugar.
thank you.